this pitch darkness, as I sit here trying to document what happened, my heart races. 4 years have passed, yet the memories remain as vivid as if they were yesterday. Everything began in 2020, when the pandemic changed the life of the entire world and changed my life in a way I could never have imagined. At that time, I tried to share my story with the world by sending it to some story and tale-focused pages, but no one paid attention. Today, I return to tell what happened, not just to share my experience, but because what I thought had gone has returned. And this time, I no longer have the strength to face it alone. Here in our city, where reality mingles with legends, and where generations pass down tales of creatures and spirits that defy logic, I used to mock all those stories. I was a skeptical atheist, believing only in what I could see and touch. I lived with my family in our city, that vibrant city. Our home included my parents, my paternal grandmother, and my older brothers. But there was someone else, someone who changed all our lives, my half-brother from my father's side, Adam. Adam wasn't always part of our lives. His mother, bitter towards my father, kept him away from us throughout the past years. We didn't really know him until the last year of his life, when he decided to move in with us to study a major that wasn't available in his town. Despite his mother's strong opposition, his determination to achieve his dream was stronger. But fate had other plans. On an ill-fated morning in 2019, while Adam was waiting for the bus to attend his lecture, a drunk driver ended his promising life in an instant. My words about his death might seem cold, but how can I describe the deep sorrow for someone I only knew for 1 year? Nevertheless, that year was enough to leave an indelible mark on all our lives. What I didn't know then was that Adam's death was just the beginning of a series of events that would force me to reconsider everything I believed in. Adam's mother's bitterness spewed venom. Her harsh words pierced my father's heart like poisoned arrows, accusing him of driving her son to his death. "You stole him from me only to deliver him to death," she screamed in his face. Words that might seem to some like the product of grief-induced madness, but they carved deep furrows in my father's soul, who only wanted to embrace his son and give him a chance to achieve his dreams. At Adam's funeral, grief turned into a horrific scene. Before the shocked eyes of the mourners, his mother erupted in a fit of hysterical anger. Her screams and curses filled the place, and she swore with a voice trembling with hatred that she would take revenge. My father stood stunned, simultaneously swallowing the bitterness of losing his son and the humiliation of public insult. A year as heavy as mountains passed, then the pandemic came to add darkness upon darkness. My father, a respected university professor for more than 30 years, suddenly found himself outside the university walls. The technology that invaded education was foreign to him, and in an instant, decades of experience and dedication evaporated. This professional fall was another straw that burdened his back, already bent under the weight of losing his son. But fate wasn't satisfied yet. The coronavirus crept into our home like an invisible shadow and took our grandmother. She was among the country's first pandemic victims. Her death in hospital isolation, without her son being able to bid her farewell, was the blow that broke my father's back. Before our tears could dry for grandmother, and a month before Adam's first death anniversary, something happened that I was never prepared for. On that ill-fated day, my father locked his room door. Hours passed, and the sound of his silence screamed in our ears. We called him repeatedly, but there was no answer. When Kareem broke down the door, what we saw, the expressions of horror and grief etched on my father's face. There are no words in any language that can describe that scene. It's a pain understood only by those who have lived through its bitter moments. At that moment, I didn't know that what we were going through was just the beginning, and that the real darkness hadn't yet begun. On the bed, there lay a silent letter and a faded photograph. My father embracing young Adam, a memento from a simpler, happier time. I couldn't read that letter. I was drowning in a sea of anger and pain, hating my father for abandoning us. How could a father leave his children like this? I was too young to understand the depth of depression that had swallowed him. Strange things began creeping into our lives slowly. At first they were just nightmares. My father's face appearing in my dreams, his eyes filled with regret, begging for forgiveness. My family repeatedly urged me to read his letter, believing his soul needed peace, but my heart had turned to stone. Then came that ill-fated day. Adam's mother stood at our doorstep, an evil smile drawn on her face. She came to offer condolences, but her words were dipped in poison. She felt victorious that her revenge had been fulfilled. In a moment of overwhelming anger, I found myself pushing her out of the house. That night, the nightmare returned, but this time it was different. I woke up with a strange weight pressing on my chest, a deep sadness that almost suffocated me. The air itself seemed heavy, saturated with something I couldn't explain. I left my room searching for a glass of water, and at 3 a.m, I found my family gathered in the living room. Before I could utter a word, Kareem looked at me and said in a hushed voice, "You feel it now too, don't you? That weight, that bone-deep sadness." They told me they hadn't slept for 2 weeks. They had been gathering every night to pray, trying to lighten the weight of the presence that filled the house. "We pray for our father because of how he left," Kareem said. "Only when we pray does staying in the house become bearable." I stood there, feeling tears gathering in my eyes, and for the first time since my father's death, I began to realize there was something bigger than me, bigger than my anger and grief. Something that had begun to creep into our lives and was about to change everything. After that night, strange events began unfolding like black spiderwebs. On the home altar, my father's photo began to burn slowly on its own, as if an invisible hand was erasing it from existence, until it turned into a barely visible black shadow. Every night I waited with a pounding heart for what would come. Darkness and sorrow became my constant companions. One night, while lying on my bed after turning off the lights, I heard a door open. The clock showed 11 at night. I thought Kareem had returned, so I got up to check. As I descended the stairs, I saw a shadow flash by. "Kareem?" I called, but there was no answer. I stopped midway down the stairs, and suddenly, a whisper. A whisper that gradually escalated into a terrifying scream directly behind me. The voice, dear God, the voice sounded like my father's, but it was distorted, as if it came from the depths of hell itself. "Are you afraid, my son?" the voice whispered. "Are you afraid of your father? I'll show you what hell looks like for those who end their lives." I tried to flee upstairs, but an invisible weight held me back. I wanted to scream, but my voice froze in my throat. I tried to remember any prayer, any sacred words, but my stammering only amused that entity. It laughed with a horrifying sound, asserting that my prayers were useless because deep down I didn't believe. It pushed me backward with supernatural force. I fell, and darkness swallowed me. I didn't regain consciousness until my brother found me. This is just a glimpse of what happened. Things calmed down for a while, but now they're returning, stronger and darker. This time, we're not alone. My mother and siblings are also witnessing things that cannot be explained. Long nights of fear and darkness began to accumulate. And as time passed, the strange events unfolded before us with greater clarity, becoming more savage and dangerous. That night, when I saw my father's distorted shadow and heard his terrifying voice, it was like an electric shock. I couldn't move or scream. That supernatural entity held me in place with extraordinary force. And when it began to speak, and I realized it was truly my father, I could only cry out to God for help. But as that distorted voice said, my prayers were futile. The next day, I asked my mother and siblings to explain what was happening. They didn't need to explain. They had witnessed the same things. Kareem began telling me what he discovered in Father's letter, which had remained sealed until then. In that letter, our father revealed a horrifying truth. It turned out he hadn't simply committed suicide due to depression and loss, but because he realized his soul would never find rest until his sin was atoned for. The sin he committed when he allowed Adam to live with us during the last year of his life. That ill-fated day was actually the day of Adam's death. Father told us that the accident wasn't just a coincidence. It was planned. Adam's mother had sworn revenge, and so she hired a drunk driver to kill her son. When our father learned the truth, he felt such burning guilt and sorrow that he could no longer bear to live. It didn't end there. In his letter, Father told us it was time to atone for his sin. He had made a contract with dark forces to bring Adam's spirit to the house, so he could apologize to him and seek eternal peace. But these forces weren't playing by the rules. And now, these monsters want to take us all to hell with them. In the following days, the truth began to unfold more and more. It turned out that Adam's mother was also connected to hidden and evil forces. She had contacted a notorious evil sorcerer known for summoning spirits, and swore to him to summon her son's spirit to take revenge on our father and our family. That sorcerer, with his terrifying personality and infamous in dark circles, accepted the task for a hefty price. He wasn't interested in revenge. Rather, he wanted to use Adam's spirit as a bridge to bring stronger demonic forces into this world. As they say, when you summon the devil, don't expect him to come alone. The real nightmare began here. The sorcerer performed the dark rituals and summoned Adam's spirit, but this time it wasn't alone. With it came creatures from the world of darkness, terrifying and supernatural monsters that cannot be described. And so, these beings spread throughout our house, hunting for our souls to take us to hell. Adam's mother hadn't expected this fate. She thought she would get her revenge and find peace, but instead, she opened a gateway to eternal horror. When she realized what she had done, she tried to flee, but the monsters caught up with her and ended her life in a horrific way. And so my mother, siblings, and I were left alone to face this nightmare. Our father was gone, leaving us a warning letter, but no means of defense. We had to face these dark creatures on our own. Every night, we waited anxiously for what would happen. The shadows and terrifying sounds never stopped roaming the house. We tried praying and seeking help from a wise man specialized in exorcism, but to no avail. These demonic forces were too powerful to submit to any human force. One night, we heard a tremendous noise from the downstairs. We cautiously descended at night and witnessed a terrifying scene. The monsters had drawn a huge magical circle in the living room and were performing mysterious and demonic rituals. We felt a terrifying weight in the air, as if darkness itself was growing darker. Suddenly, a mysterious figure appeared before us. It was the sorcerer himself. He wore strange black clothes and trembled while muttering words we couldn't understand. We realized he was trying to control those dark forces he had summoned. But the monsters didn't want to obey him. The terrible struggle began. The sorcerer used all his magical power to try to maintain control. But the dark creatures were stronger. Sparks and lightning flew everywhere, and the ground shook beneath our feet. We stood stunned, watching the horrifying scene without the ability to move. Suddenly, the magical circle exploded in a powerful flash, sending waves of dark energy in every direction. The air became heavy and suffocating, and we felt something pulling us toward the abyss. We tried to escape, but the supernatural force held us in place. Then we heard a familiar voice calling us. It was our father, but not the distorted shadow we had seen before. This time there was a faint light surrounding him, and his eyes were full of sadness and regret. "My dear children," he said in a calm voice, "I have made a terrible mistake. I have opened a door that cannot be closed. These demonic creatures I summoned will not show mercy. You must confront them and drive them from this house before they take us one by one." He told us that only the sorcerer himself could confront these forces. But the sorcerer was now in a state of panic and weakness, no longer able to maintain control. We had to take on the task ourselves. Without hesitation, we approached the sorcerer. His face was pale with terror, begging us to save him. We held him firmly and forced him to complete the counter-rituals. It was an exhausting and terrifying attempt, as those dark forces were trying with all their might to stop us. But we didn't give up. We shouted sacred prayers and chants at the top of our lungs, holding on to the sorcerer until he completed the ritual. Then there was a massive explosion of sacred energy, sending waves of light that drove away the darkness. The monsters trembled and screamed in pain, beginning to vanish like ghosts. The sorcerer fell to the ground, a halo of light surrounding his head. We had done it. We had banished those demonic forces from our home. At that moment, my father appeared once again. His face was radiant with the peace he had long lost. "Thank you," he said with a smile. "I have now atoned for my sin. I have found the peace I was seeking." Then he slowly began to fade away, as if melting into the light. Before he disappeared completely, he looked at us tenderly and said, "I love you all. Be strong. Don't let the darkness take you." And so my father departed to a better place. leaving us to realize that life doesn't end at death. There is always hope, even in the darkest times. We are still trying to recover from this horrifying experience, but we feel an inner change. We no longer fear the darkness as we once did. We have seen its true face and known that we are not alone in facing it. Now we are stronger, and we know there are higher powers watching over us, even in the darkest of times.